1 minute
Past 12. You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Maryam Mkwanda. It is time for our segment with the Islamic Care Line. Exercise has proven benefits for older people and young people alike. It reduces risks of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, obesity, and more. While there is a lot of emphasis on the physical well being of older people, the same emphasis or importance needs to be given or placed on their mental health and well being. And to give us insight about the different aspects of elderly wellness and what they entail is Counselor Shuhaida Adam from Islamic Care Line. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shuhaida, shukran for joining me.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Always a pleasure to be on the show and always a pleasure to be discussing these matters with the viewers and the listeners of Salam Media.
Alhamdulillah.
Oh,
Now, right. What are the dimensions of wellness for senior living?
okay. So you touched a little bit on physical wellness, and that, of
Mhm.
course, the physical wellness has also a great impact on emotional wellness and our mental wellness. Because of course, as humans, every aspect of our lives are it's quite connected. So, and like you said, a lot of emphasis is focused more on the physical health of the elderly person. Um, in terms of the medical care, in terms of exercise, just the physical exercise, and not a lot of focus is placed on the mental wellness as well as the rights of the elderly. So I'll go a little bit into that also, just a little further in what basic rights are entrenched in our constitution. And there's actually in South Africa, there's a specific act. So it's by law. Elderly people are entitled to specific rights. I'll cover that a little bit later. But so when we look at emotional wellness, one of the dimensions, of course, is relationships. So we'll cover a little bit about relationships. And when we look at the mental aspect of wellness, so just in terms of brain functioning, capacity, mental capacity, we'll have to look at all of that. And these are all matters that it's a build up. So I'll speak a little bit about the stages of growth and how do people actually reach the stage of being an elderly person, because nobody wakes up as an elderly person. I don't know if you've heard this saying, and people often say nobody wakes up old. Um, Eventually, we build up towards this age, and of course, as time ticks and then our years go by and years get added onto our age, then of course we are building in terms of our wellness, in terms of our foundations from young. And when we are now at the stage of old age, our elderly people then often look back and they have an opportunity to reflect on what they are currently living with right now and looking at a life, whatever they've invested towards their life. They then reach a stage of reflection, and this will then impact also on their mental wellness and their emotional wellness.
Mhm. All right. So let us go through what you've just mentioned. Can you elaborate on those points?
Okay, so the one thing I want to touch on is the stage. Being in a stage of development, it's basically called a life stage. Okay, so I've touched a few times in previous shows also on the stages of development. So as we go through life, through different ages, there are certain tasks, there are certain responsibilities that we need to achieve, and then we reach an outcome which then allows us to move on to the next stage in life. So we've covered quite a bit in terms of children and adolescents, where they have to develop certain outcomes for their age group. And then once they've mastered that outcome, they can then go on to the next outcome. For example, things like skills, learning to hold a spoon, and then a child can learn to eat from a bowl, and then you build onto that. So it carries on throughout our lives. So round about the ages of about 40 to about 60, 30, let's say 35 to about 60, At that stage, people are adults and they are investing a lot into the world around them. They're investing into their work, they're building on careers and also family. So at that stage, they are now raising children and they are investing into the next generation. So once we reach the age of about 65, you have now reached another stage of development. And in terms of our overall stages of development, this is almost regarded as the final stage of development. It's called integrity versus despair. So at this stage, elderly people often are reflecting back on a life that was possibly well lived. They have a sense of fulfillment to what they have put into the world behind them. Um, or else, if they do reflect and they realize that there was a lot that they did not manage to do, or they're not happy with what they did through the years of their lives, then you find elderly people experiencing quite a bit of regret, despair, and possible bitterness. So when in this stage here, in this stage of development, people can either then walk away with a sense of wisdom. So people who look back and reflect on a life that they feel they've invested very well in, they've connected with people very well, they have now built for the next generation, they have learned from life experiences. These elderly people tend to hold a sense of wisdom. They often open to sharing their views and their thoughts about other matters from a very wise point of view. People who have not really established a life that they feel was very well lived, they don't have a sense of fulfillment at their older age. They often feel maybe there were things that they needed to still do, or the relationships around them are not as connected as they would have hoped. They tend to feel a little bit down. They tend to feel a sense of despair that I could have done better, or I still need to do, and I don't have time, and I don't have now maybe the capacity or the capability or the means to carry on investing into building the world around me. So there's a sense of unhappiness, and oftentimes it will then impact on their emotional wellness. So when we are struggling emotionally, it can come out as elderly people who often experience anger. They often are frustrated. They are still very much busy and full of stress because they've got a lot of things that they feel they still need to do, and time is running out. So that then impacts on their emotional wellness. Another aspect of emotional wellness, of course, is relationships. So at this stage, as people now are reaching the older years, the first thing you also notice is that the people around you are passing on of older age. Maybe now sicknesses, and they accumulated their sicknesses and they are passing on. So elderly people having to face the reality of their first and foremost their partner, the old age of their partner, and their partner passing on. And then your friends, your siblings, coping with the reality that people are moving to the next world, to the year after, and you possibly also have a sense of feeling left behind. Your social circle, friends that you would constantly spend time with, when they pass on, there is possibly a void. There's a sense of emptiness that the people who really got you, the people that you could connect with, they are no longer there. We then also look at your relationship with the next generation. So your children, your grandchildren, other younger family members who are now adults, and are our elderly people still able to maintain a connection with family members? We very much encourage it. So oftentimes there's a disconnect. Elderly people feel rather disconnected from younger people, from possibly their children, their grandchildren, because as life progresses, they may feel that they're drifting apart from the next generation. So here also we also want to encourage people to remain younger people to remain connected with the elders of the family, and the older people to try and reach out also to younger people and not to necessarily be intimidated by what you don't understand in the world around you. So oftentimes elderly people, they feel intimidated by the lifestyle of younger people. Possibly it's got a lot of technology, or younger people are moving to different environments, or the social circles are becoming more open. older people have to now face a reality of mindsets that are changing. What was possibly not acceptable when this elderly person was growing up or as a younger adult, it is now much more acceptable now. So elderly people are also struggle. Some of them struggle to adapt to the changing world around them. So that can cause quite a bit of disconnect. And one of the greatest harms in terms of elderly wellness, also one of the greatest harms that's going to impact on the well-being of older people is disconnected from others. So having a lack of social relationships, or even the quality of the social relationships, if it is very poor, it can cause a great amount of harm. Loneliness, that is a it's very common with the very common in elderly people's life, a sense of loneliness. As I explained earlier, their friends have now passed on, and there's a disconnect also. And what we also found, I don't necessarily have specific research to prove this, but what I've seen and what we've seen at the Care Line also is that oftentimes people who experience emotional loneliness, it then also has a physical impact on their health. So elderly people who they may be a bit sickly, the loneliness can then it can slow down your recovery. Then we have actual mental disorders that can be diagnosed in old age. That also will impact on emotional wellness. So things like Alzheimer's, your dementia. Elderly people are a lot more susceptible to depression. Also substance use. So there's a lot more access to prescription pills. There's also when oftentimes when elderly people are going through physical illness, there's as your body changes and there's perhaps sometimes unexplainable pains. There's just elderly people will always tell you that they just know that their body doesn't feel as it used to. So they may then look more to medication, and they may even unwittingly become addicted to prescription pills because they find benefit in it, and they may innocently become addicted also to prescription pills. And then we often have pharmacists who mean well, I suppose, but they are violating the law by by giving out prescription pills without an active prescription. So younger people are a lot more susceptible. Elderly people are more susceptible to that. And then the creeping and the growing, the mental illnesses. So things like your dementia, your Alzheimer's, things where there's no real cure. There's a lot of fear around that when people realize that the mental functioning is not as it used to be. So that just even the general forgetfulness, the general struggling to sort of do usual activities that you used to. There's a lot of fear around that. So elderly people, they coping with the reality of change that they can't control. So of course, things like exercise, eating well, that lessens it to some degree. It does prevent quite a bit of a lot of the conditions that come along with old age. But there are certain things that are quite serious, quite severe, and our elderly people then have to face the reality of change and a lack of mental functioning, and then also mobility. So a lack of physical functioning also. There's a change in physical capabilities. There isn't as strength is not as the same, stamina is not as it used to be. So they are now coping with adjusting to a new level of functioning. So there can be a lot of emotional difficulty around that. So our stage of development, all these changes, when we are in a positive stage of development, when we are in a positive line along this development, people are able to cope with these changes. And when the key thing also is the support that we have around us. So oftentimes elderly people will always, when you ask them what would they like, they will always tell you they don't want material items. They've had material items. They just want their basic needs covered. So food, shelter, etc., warm, keeping warm, basic comfort, and then it's the company around them. So elderly people, they need that company around them. They need to be recognized. They need a sense of belonging in the family, a sense of still having a say, a sense of choice. And that also gives a sense of fulfillment. That can build towards a sense of fulfillment, which is what we want in our elderly, in the final stages of our years. So being included, being involved, and I'll speak a little bit later about how when we are living with elderly people, how can we also respect their right to independence, their right to autonomy. So people thrive with warm connections, with interest. So as family members, people around show interest in how our elderly people are doing, how are our elderly family members doing, what do they need, spending some time with them. Because, of course, the opposite of this loneliness is to have family connections, to have social connections, not even necessarily family, even community connections, just having people coming to show some connection with you. And it makes a world of a difference in the emotional well-being of our elderly population.
Mhm. All right, Shuhaida, let us take a quick break, and when we return, we can look at, living with elderly people. I'm sure many of us have tried living, or some of us do currently live with elderly people,
Mm.
and there's a bit of a clash there because of the different age groups. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.
The refugee camps in Syria or orphanages in Yemen, the eyes of the needy speak volumes with just one glare. We know what it's like to be at ground zero with food essentials, clothing and blankets, fresh water portal trucks, and even on site navigators. We use every cent to better their tomorrow. Become part of our journey to bring relief to all. Go to www.ashrafulaid.org or call us on 011 809 8181. Ashraful Aid, under the auspices of Maulana Suhail Wadi.
Babu, why don't you loosen your belt a bit more?
But why now?
Well, it's very tight, blocking air to your brain.
Haju, this is only a start. I need to tighten up a bit more. Funds are tight and the cost of living is high.
Funds are not tight. It's your haram insurance which is tightening our barakat.
Okay, Haju. I will call my insurance friend tomorrow.
Maybe I must tighten up on my cooking from now on too.
No, Haju, we don't need to tighten up. It's okay. Look, I'm even throwing away my belt.
Don't tighten your belt. Change your insurance. Leaving Riba Insurance is easier than you think. Call Amana IFS for all your personal and commercial takaful needs. 0861 786 393. Amana, leave Riba for good. Amana IFS is a registered financial services provider.
Africa. As the crisis in Palestine continues, the Africa Muslims Agency teams are on the ground facilitating emergency food and medical assistance to the affected families. Donate 15,000 rand or any amount and help the people of Palestine. Call AMA now on 083-251-9376 or donate online at africamuslimsagency.co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, inspiring the spirit of giving.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
20 minutes past 12, you are listening to the Mid-Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Maryam Mkwanda, and today we are discussing the different aspects of elderly wellness and what they entail with Councillor Shuhaida Adam from Islamic Care Line. Shuhaida, shukran for staying on the line now. How to live with elderly people, sometimes it's a personality clash, sometimes it's an age group thingy, and you have teenagers in the house, and you have 60 plus in the house, and you have your 30s and 40s in the house as well. So it can become a little bit of a challenge.
I think that can also, you're putting it quite mildly at times. And oftentimes people are thrown into it. So there isn't really time to prepare for when the elderly person shifts in, or when maybe the younger family shifts in with the elderly person because of just changing environmental circumstances. There often isn't time to prepare, but if there is time to prepare, and if this is a decision that the family is making, try to prepare as thoroughly as possible. So one of the key things I can the first thing I can actually share is include the elderly person in the decisions that's going to be made. So ask them about what would they think about, decision A, decision B. What would they like to include in terms of the changes that's going to be made? Also, just why is there a need for this person to stay with you, or why are you moving in with the elderly person? Share it with them so that there's clarification, there is full understanding. Even with the younger family members, why are the grandparents coming to stay with us, or why are we going to stay with them? So that there's full understanding by everybody. Okay, so the key thing here also is involvement, cooperation. So what is it going to entail? If granny and grandpa are moving in, the items that they can bring, what about their lifestyle is going to change? Are they going to be able to still go to the same places they used to go, maintain the same lifestyle? And I like to talk about pen and paper, putting things down in pen and paper, working things out, explaining perhaps to granny and grandpa that, your weekly friends that used to meet up, they're now extra 50 kilometers away. And with my work schedule, I won't be able to assist you with that kind of a thing, right? So adjustment to lifestyle. What is it also going to mean for you as the caregiver? Oftentimes people actually have to quit their jobs to care for an elderly parent or an elderly relative who's staying at home. And especially the more care the person requires, there's of course a lot more involvement in that, a lot more investment. If you're going to be quitting if you're going to be ending work and taking the job on full time, what is it really going to mean, and how much support are you going to have? Because often families believe that if one person is caring for the elderly family member, that's good enough. And unfortunately, it does require more than one person to care for elderly persons. One person is going to experience burnout, especially if the care requirements are a lot more. If it's a lot of physical care requirements, so if the person is bedridden, if they have a lot of medical needs, they need to be taken for chemo or dialysis or treatments every few days, and a lot as the requirements are more, one person is going to need a lot more support. And this is, of course, where families have to come together and plan. We often see that the burden falls, it's not even a burden, I'm going to use that word very at a risk. So if families can view it as a burden, but the responsibility falls more to one person. And it's the one person that it falls onto, they're often tasked with this responsibility on their own, or they're not even given a choice. So that can then lead to frustration, which this person may then take the frustration out on the elderly person. Okay, so family members need to come together and realize also, where does the difficulty lie? Where do the challenges lie? Is it because the elderly person is regarded as being challenging? Or is it because the caregiver is not getting the correct support? And you are most likely going to find that the challenge lies with the family or the community not giving the caregiver enough support. So when we're working with elderly people, we need to utilize as much support as possible. Even an organization like Age in Action, there are NGOs that are dedicated to working with the elderly. They are able to assist the family. If, for example, the caregiver has a commitment that they need to see for a few hours and there's nobody to care for this elderly person, an NGO can step in for those few hours even. So look at what other community resources you have. Recognize also that it's going to require a lot of patience. As they age, then there's going to be a change in their personality also. So one of the key things is tolerance and patience, cooperation also. Recognize also that as hard as it is for you as a caregiver to adjust, it's also very hard for the elderly person to adjust to living with a new environment, living in their child's home, so giving up their own home. So recognize just how hard the adjustment is also for the elderly person. And again, utilize that patience, that tolerance, as you would like that that space to adjust. If when you change your environment, your elderly parent would also require that. Elderly people often, they need the company of other elderly people as well, so they peers, so not to isolate them socially. We find often that when our elderly parents move in, or our grandparents move in with us, we don't take them anywhere. We expect them to stay in the home, and then when we as a family go out, we leave them at home because it might just be too difficult, or it's a bit too much for them, or we just need a break. But what you actually are doing is isolating our elderly person from social circles. You're isolating them from the world around them. We often get scared that if we take them out, we might lose them, or they may become disoriented. We don't want them to go do their own errands. We don't want them to go to the shops on their own, etc. We become scared. Try as much to work around it. We cannot prevent our older people from moving out, from moving on their own, from going out. They do require social interactions, and they are not prisoners. We cannot lock them up. If they want to go to the shops, and especially as they are if the mental capacity is quite functional, we cannot hold them back, just because of convenience. So make arrangements, somebody to assist them. You'll often find that people are often willing to support you when they have an understanding of what the support is going to entail. Okay, so if you can point it out, for example, a neighbor's going to the shops, and if your parent wants to go to one shop, for example, sometimes you'll find that people are willing to assist you with that. Okay, so we need to also take into account their social considerations, their need for socializing, where there are differences also. So for example, if you want to do task A in a certain way and the elderly person wants to do task A in their own way, you'll have to come to some sort of compromise, discussion, except also that maybe try the second way. And if the second way doesn't work out, then come back to the first way. Okay, so you may also almost have to lose the battle to win the war, kind of a thing. Okay, so get that involvement, get that cooperation, cooperate yourself, be willing to sacrifice, because this is now, of course, a different life stage for this person that you're caring for. So recognize also that they are not at your stage. So you may have a certain way of thinking, they have a certain way, but you'll have to come to some form of a compromise. And again, the support structures around you. You may need a time out. The person the person you're caring for may also need a time out. So utilize that. Look at counseling as a support mechanism also. Oftentimes, just having a third party involved, you will then be able to come to some sort of common ground. And counseling can help also for the elderly person to share a lot of what their fears are. And what you'll find also is that when we are under care of our children or our grandchildren, our elderly people don't really want to share what their fears are. They're worried about burdening this person. Okay, so they often don't want to share. They don't want to ask, because they feel that they are already dependent on on the people that are caring for them. So give them an avenue for sharing their worries, their fears, their thoughts. And counseling is a wonderful avenue because it's a neutral party, and people can feel a lot more comfortable sharing with a neutral party that they know they're not dependent on. So consider that. Islamic Care Line, we have some counselors who would work very well with the elderly. So try and arrange an appointment with that. Then recognize also rights. I think that's a show on its own also when we do the actual legal rights relating to the older persons, because there's an Older Persons Act in place. It relates to the care of the older person. It especially relates to their finance and their right to making choices around their financial arrangements. So as children, as grandchildren, etc., we often feel that we need to then take control of their finances. But we need to include them. Okay, they still hold the right to make choices around whatever they own, their assets, their properties, their living arrangements, the spending of their finances. We don't have a right to their pension. We may not use the pension for our own purposes. We don't have a right also to force the elderly people to sell up their assets, to sell up their house and share the money with the children or divide it out. We do not have a right to force elderly people to give up their assets. We don't have a right. We cannot force them also to share the personal details. For example, the banking code, the banking PIN, the details of perhaps policies, investments, etc. they would need to then be very much involved in that. But like I said, I think that's a show on its own also, where we can unpack the rights of elderly people and the act, and what recourse is available to people who feel that that there's a need for further intervention. Where people are struggling, they can contact us, and I will link them also to Age in Action. They are a wonderful organization, and then also dependent on where you are staying, there might be other very local NGOs that are working in your area, so who focus only on the elderly. So if people need some form of assistance, some form of advice, contact me, and then we can take it from there. Our number is 011 373 8080.
All right, Shuhaida, shukran for that. In fact, I was going to stop you when you started speaking about the rights for elderly. I'm like, no, wait, we can tackle this next week or another time. So let's save that information for then. But for now, shukran so much for your time.
Afwan, always a pleasure, inshallah. We'll carry on with the conversation next week, inshallah.
Inshallah. Have a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Right, so for any of you who would like assistance with anything, whether it's with your elderly, whether it's with your marriage, any other relationships, you can contact Islamic Care Line on 011 373 8080. They are based in Fordsburg, Johannesburg. Once again, 011 373 8080. You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media. We will be right back.